My name is Susan Hagstrom. I'm the Director of Undergraduate Advising in the College of Environmental Design. And I've been on campus for 25 years. I've been a manager for about 11. And I'm happy to be having this conversation about one of my favorite topics and something I feel very passionately about. But before we start, I just want to get a sense of who's in the room and how many of you are in your first 2 years of employment at UC Berkeley. All right. Okay, how about 3 to 5 years? 6 to 10? 10 to 20? Over 20? All right, there's a few of my partners over here who have been here a long time. And then I know we have some visitors from off campus or special guests today. Anyone who, thank you, Mushin. And then how many of you are currently managing or supervising other people? So a lot of you. How many of you are thinking maybe in someday you might do that? A few of you. Okay, well, great. So we have quite a range of experience in the room. Happy about that because this is can be a complicated topic, and so we need everyone's thinking about how we can move this forward. Okay, so what we'll be doing today is a brief, about 10-minute writing experience just to get you thinking about these issues, and you actually are all experts on this topic already. So it's really just remembering what were those experiences you've had that were positive or negative. How do you define staff engagement? So we'll do a little bit of writing just to prime the pump. And then we have a panel of esteemed guests who will be talking with us about their experiences and their thoughts on this. And then we'll open it up for Q&A at the end and discussion. So what is this sweet spot? In my mind, it's the place where the employees' passions and goals and talents and skills meet the needs and the goals of the organization. So it's that place. Other people might call it engagement. I always just call it the sweet spot for some reason. I don't know where I heard that initially, but that place of intersection. In my 25 years here, I've had the great privilege of being supervised by people who really supported my development, and I've seen how it has made me more committed to the organization, more committed to creating this kind of environment for other people, and it also has encouraged me to really do my best work. So I then think about how do we create this environment for other people? And I think sometimes about this idea of superheroes. So what my people developer superhero, I don't even remember her name now, but she was in the School of Public Health, and I remember she had this reputation on campus of really developing people and holding them up and helping them follow their own goals, but also, again, meeting the needs of the organization. So that stuck in my mind, and I thought, I want to be like that. So fast forward several years until I was thinking about being a supervisor myself, and what part of me thought what a supervisor was somebody who writes people up. They keep people in line. And even when I went to the supervisor training programs back then, there was a lot about policy, about writing those memos, like keeping people in line. And I thought, oh, I don't know if this is for me. I really don't, this is like not really my thing, writing people up. But I decided to take the plunge anyway. And I applied for my first supervisor position. And another one of my superheroes is my dad. So my dad was principal of an elementary school in Fairbanks, Alaska. And he focused a lot on community building and how you engage teachers. And what he told me was, find out what each person is passionate about, what they care about, what matters to them, and find some way to integrate that into their job. It's probably not going to be their whole job, but they need to be doing, at least part of their job needs to be something that they feel really engaged and passionate about. So I've really held that, and I use that still every year when performance appraisals come up. What are your goals? How do you want to contribute? What are you excited about? How can I support you in that? And then we think together about how to make that happen. So eventually I came across a model that expressed what I knew intuitively. So you can find this on the web if you search Blessing White, the X model of employee engagement. And it's trying to find that spot. Let's see, I think there's a pointer here. Oops. So that spot right there, that's the maximum satisfaction for the employee and the maximum contribution for the organization. Right below it are the almost engaged. And then there's other, you can read about the other, the other people too, the disengaged, and there's different experiences that employees can have. But what we're aiming for is just to explore for today, what is that spot of engagement, that sweet spot, and how can we encourage that? So we're gonna spend a little bit of time on this worksheet that should be on your chair. And again, this is to get you thinking about your own experiences because you already have expertise in this area. So you can jump around on this. We'll spend about 10 minutes and pick any questions that speak to you. Think about questions you might have for our panelists, and then I'll ring a bell about 2 minutes before our time is up. So again, pick any of the questions that speak to you, and we'll just write for about 10 minutes. All right, please wrap up your thoughts and thank your partner. Now we're going to transition to hearing from our esteemed panelists. So I'm so happy to introduce this group of three. Really pleased that they all said yes. First, we have David Surratt, Interim Associate Vice Chancellor in Student Affairs. Shirley Solano, Director of Graduate Matters in Electrical Engineering and Computer Sciences. And Fabrizio Mejia, Assistant Vice Chancellor in the Division of Equity and Inclusion. So they are all very busy. They were just talking about doing performance appraisals right now. So I know that we're all many of us are in that boat. So thank you so much for taking the time. And our format is going to be that I have 6 questions, and we have 30 minutes. If it looks like we're to the end of our 30 minutes, I'm not going to ask every question, and then we'll turn to you all to ask some questions. So please make notes as we go along of things you'd like to ask them. We have a just fantastic experience and expertise up here on the stage. So thank you, the 3 of you, so much for being here. So could you please introduce yourself and share one professional experience that made a difference in your own career path? What was it about that experience that was transformative? And you get to use the special double mic.
They got small hands. Good morning. So I'll just jump right in. I think as I was thinking about this over the last few days, I didn't think I had many examples, but then I started to think about my mom and the example of her leadership, and I really wanted to go there, but I didn't want to cry in front of y'all. So the one I chose was, as I was coming up, as I was an EOP counselor, I saw Chancellor Staff Advisory Committee, and people had been telling me for years, you should apply, you should do that, you should do that. Like, no, I'm good. I like being a counselor. I like working with students. I'm an introvert. Don't see myself doing that. So finally decided myself to apply and go through that process. And for me, why that was transformative was because it challenged me to take on different ways of being as a staff member. So 16 people from all over the campus, 3-year term, and as a young staff, a young staff of color at the time, I noticed that I was very intimidated when I was in particular rooms, and I noticed for me it was dealing with white men in power. And I would really think about what I was saying all the time because I was putting these things on myself about I'm representing, folks of color. I have to come. I have to do my homework. I have to be prepared. And sometimes I would do it to the point of overthinking it where the moment passed and I didn't share what I needed to share. And then someone else would share it and then they'd be like, oh, that's awesome. That's great. And I'd be like, dang, I was a coward. But I think for me, and then as I went through the organization, then people came and said, well, you should think about leadership in CSAC. And I was like, no, I'm not really a leader. I don't see myself that way. So I noticed a pattern in myself that people saw that I was ready before I thought I was ready. And one of my mentors pulled me aside and really said, look, you can't quit sabotaging yourself. You're ready to be 100% ready. You may never reach that 100%, right? So he likened it to packing a parachute. He's like, you can pack the parachute, pack it and repack it, pack it and repack it because you're so afraid that it may not open. But at some point you have to jump. And so I jumped, and for me that was transformative, and I realized, dang, I whatever I bring into the role, I will make it my own, and then I will learn the rest as I go along.
Hi, I'm Shirley Solano, and I work for the Electrical Engineering Computer Sciences Department, and I am going to talk about my mom. My mom is one of my favorite superheroes. She was an elementary school teacher for over 40 years, and basically she won almost every teaching award you can think of in her career, and I find her to be such an inspiration. So much that when I was finishing college, I thought I wanted to be an elementary school teacher too. So I did that for about 4 years, teaching in San Francisco and in Japan, and I realized I'm not very good at it. It takes a very special person to have that patience to work with elementary school children. And that was transformative for me because it made me realize that I'm probably better suited with bigger kids. And that's why I work for a university. And I've enjoyed it ever since. And I originally started working, I taught here in San Francisco and in Japan. And then I came back here and thought, I reflected back on my own experiences of moving to California and going to school here at Berkeley and being a little bit culture shocked when I first arrived at Berkeley. I'm originally from the island of Guam, which is only about 30 miles long and 4 miles wide. And I lived there until I was in high school. And I finished high school and came out to California, and it was a complete shock. And I always thought I'd like to give back to working with international students. And I spent a couple years primarily working with international students, and then thinking, I think I'd like to give more and expand my own professional career. So I then started expanding and moved to the main campus, and now work with a bunch of different students. And it's been a great experience.
Hi, good morning. My name is David Surratt. And when I thought about this question, I think one of the things I thought about was my first experience with a formal mentorship program. So there was an institute called Regional Entry-Level Institute for Housing Professionals on the East Coast when I joined that. And many of you all probably have institutes or associations associated with your work directly. But the big thing is what I was looking for was an opportunity to connect with someone. And what I realized back then that I wish I'd known better now was continuing to reflect on what are those things that you're looking for in mentorship. And so what I was able to do was figure out my own internal kind of list. So when you think about like even mentorship, it's almost it's a relationship. You think about what are your deal breakers and what are the things you hope to have in that relationship. And the biggest things that I had for me for deal breakers was one, looking for someone who had the knowledge and experience of managing organizations as a man of color, or particularly a black male, identify as Asian American and African American. I'm half Korean. But I was looking for someone who had navigated experiences at predominantly white institutions. Two, someone who had managed conflict or even conduct processes for students, because that was something that was really scary for me as an early and young professional. And three, someone who had emotional intelligence, someone who had the ability to actually be caring and kind and inclusive to me as a fellow introvert, to be able to connect with me as an individual. So those are my three deal breakers. And this happened probably about 13 years ago. And this person was named Tom Seeger. He's now Vice President for Student Affairs at Shepherd University in West Virginia. And I feel lucky and fortunate to have had found this person through this formal mentorship program. And then I learned also, too, that formal mentorship programs can evolve into informal mentorship relationships. And I learned a lot through him about what that should look like and how positive experience that should be. So I wanted to share that one as well as affirm the other experiences that my colleagues shared, too.
Thank you so much. Our second question is, please share an example of a work experience in which you felt really engaged. What were the conditions that made you feel that way, especially as it relates to any work conditions your supervisor did or didn't create for you? So engagement, what were the conditions, and what did your supervisor do or not do that created that environment.
My situation was that my supervisor or would-be supervisor quit a week before I was to start my current position, which was not something I was anticipating. A week after I was offered the job, she calls me and says, "Can we meet right away? There's something I really need to speak with you about." And I thought, oh, she's rescinding the offer. Oh, no. I just gave up my current position, a job I actually enjoyed, and a department I actually really enjoyed working with. And when we met, she said, "I just wanted to let you know that I accepted a new position. I know you haven't even started yet, but if you want to back out now, that's okay, but I would encourage you to continue." And there are certain junctions in your life where you can either stay where you are, or you could retreat and run away, or you could step forward and take on the challenge. And I think I live by the philosophy that I don't like to, it's easier for me to live with rejection or failure than it is to live with the regret of not knowing. So I took the challenge, and then she proceeded to tell me, "You're going to have to also hire a new position, and there's another person going on maternity leave, and there's another person retiring, and there's 2 more positions that are going to be open, and you're the next in line, so you're going to handle all of that." And I think she saw the fear in my face, but I am here 5 years later, and the first 6 months were not very easy, and they were terrible. I also went from managing what I thought would be a handful of people, 4 or 5 people, to then being in charge of about 13 people. And it was not something I really wanted, but I'm also glad that I did, because sometimes it's just easier to face your fears. And I'm also an introvert, so that's something we all have in common. But yeah, and I'm glad that I did.
The example I thought of was, I think it was early on in my career as well, I had an idea. I noticed a pattern working with first-gen students and low-income students that there was not many of the students were talking about going to graduate school and prepared at the time of transition a year before they were about to transition out. And so I began to look at and think about my own experience and talking to alumni and figure out what is it that we didn't have to be able to quickly jump into that. And so anyways, I came to my boss, Gloria Burkhalter, the director at the time of EOP, and I told her, "I have an idea. It's not fully formed." And she said, "Well, let's talk about it." And I think what I learned from watching the way she listened to me is that she taught me how to manage her. Right. So what was she looking at when I was bringing a proposal forward to her? The who, what, when, where, and the why. And she trained me to come with that. Right. So anytime after that, I came with a proposal, I was ready to answer those questions. I was also ready to upfront tell her what I thought the challenges were going to be for implementing that. And what happened was she began to trust me so much that it was a quicker process when I came to her with an idea, because she knew that she had trained me to think about the entire development of it and the implementation of it. So I thought she listened well. I thought what was a trigger for me early on when I would do that was when people would say, "We tried that before, it didn't work," or that's not the way we do it here. And I would ask, I ask why all the time. Help me, not because I want to be an a-hole, but because I want to understand, why is it that that's not possible? And typically, in my experience, the answers weren't good enough for me. I thought just because it didn't work before, it could just mean the timing wasn't right. And it's not about the people that they weren't capable. The timing sometimes is not right. So they taught me through modeling that to ask a lot of questions, to be open to things, and to put your ego aside. In particular, in fast forwarding, when there were initiatives that I had tried before and somebody came to me and said, "I want to try that," my ego would creep up in my head and say, "Well, I tried that, it didn't work." And then I would remember being on the other side of that, and I would say, "Okay, let's do it. Let's talk it through." And and typically it would work. So yeah. It was a graduate preparation course. So it started with about 15 students, and then eventually became 2 sections of 30 students each. So it very successful, and then it went in hiatus, but then came back recently with another staff member. So absolutely, yeah.
I think for me was the conditions and connection with the boss. So in a former role, I was dean of students. I was reporting to provost, who did something really powerful in my career. He really changed the power dynamics of what I was used to in organizations and the way we are often taught about what dominant leadership looks like in organizations. So this particular individual, when I moved into campus, it was actually a live-on position as dean of students. He was my provost, my boss. Showed up the first day I was there, and was like in jogging gear and started unpacking my truck with me. And that just threw me off. But I was so caught off guard at his generosity. And then, he unpacks, invites me to have dinner afterwards, and then connects with me. And one of the things that was really formative about that experience with him, it was ongoing. This was not just a one-time kind of like, oh, I'm going to show you I care, and then all of a sudden continue to dictate to you. It was an ongoing way of support. And one of the things that I learned quickly is that this experience for me changed the way I thought about importance of how people position themselves in relationships with one another. And for this person to be basically the second-ranking individual on our campus reminded me of the power of creating equilibrium and equity in relationships when it comes to the idea of rank in social systems, organizational systems. And it made me feel comfortable and safe to be there. One of the biggest things I'm sure I experienced coming to Berkeley and others experienced going to new organizations, oftentimes when you arrive somewhere, you are asking yourself the question of whether I belong there. You're asking yourself whether this was the right decision. You're asking all these different things. And so one of the most powerful things to happen is to reaffirm and provide feedback in a way that tells you made the right choice. Because most oftentimes, those first weeks, sometimes months, maybe a first year for Berkeley folks, sometimes I heard this before, that you're asking yourself, do I want to stay here? You're asking that serious question. And so that experience with this particular provost, his name is Chris Dougherty, and he reminded me of the power of reminding someone that we want you here. And there will be a later time where we go into deeper discussions, more constructive feedback. But at this point, I'm going to affirm your presence here and thank you for being here often and always. So that was helpful for me.
I feel like we could keep talking for hours on these topics. Thank you so much. I'm going to change. I'm also an introvert, so I understand that what I'm about to do might be a little disconcerting. I want to change the next question just a little bit. What do you consider staff engagement to be, and can you share an example? That's the original question. But could you also speak a little bit to how you create that kind of environment for people that you supervise? So does that make sense? How do you influence your environment to create an engaged staff?
I'll try to take a quick stab at that. I think for me, one of the things that I do is try to telegraph as much as I can. So actually, I mentioned the idea of deconstructing the idea of rank in social systems. So first thing I oftentimes do is actually ask my staff, what is your motivation? So anytime I join a new organization, my staff who directly report to me, they would laugh if they heard this, but I have a little sheet. It literally says, what motivates you? And I asked them to kind of fill out the sheet because I explained to them that I can only inspire, I cannot motivate you. Motivation is very intrinsic. But I also want to let you know that it's my responsibility as a supervisor to meet you halfway and figure out what those motivating factors are. So I do ask that question, and then we talk through that in our first meetings to kind of figure out how can I continue to support you, and we have an ongoing discussion about that. So that's one thing. I call that almost like tribalism, the idea of saying like we're on the same team, I want to make sure I care for you, et cetera. Also, I talk about creating clear expectations and talking them through, but also doing it in a way that is a two-way form of communication. This notion of back and forth continues to engage in a relationship that is mutual. And that's important for me to continue to have that thought when I'm talking to my staff. The idea of also autonomy. So I want to eventually get to a space in which I'm providing autonomy and support for my staff, knowing that we know this in education, we know this in adult education, that people bring in their experiences, their knowledge, and they provide to you in many ways as managers or supervisors probably 80% of the knowledge and skills needed to do the work. The other 20% is for you to have engagement, support, and build that level of trust. And so those are the kind of the concepts and ways I approach that.
For me, I would see staff engagement as empowering your employee, giving them the opportunity to feel vested in whatever the goal is. And I try to do that with my team members by, even if it's out of their comfort zone, I would never make them do something that I myself would not do. For example, in leading, when we have our team meetings, I started making everybody be responsible for leading at least one of the meetings, and we take turns in leading the meetings, because I also don't want to talk the whole time. And I think it's also just good professional development for them to see what it's like to actually lead the discussion, organize, getting everybody together in the room. Because sometimes it's harder than people think to actually lead a meeting. We also started a weekly graduate student seminar series, and I didn't specifically ask them, but I told them, you're all going to lead one of the seminar series. And I know that some of them were not very comfortable with that, but it's also very good to get out of your comfort zone and try different experiences. And although some of them had told me that they were a little bit nervous about that, at the end they said actually it was a good experience to try something, and although I forced them to do it, they actually appreciated it.
Yeah, it makes me think, it's a good question. What kind of culture do you have in your office, and what kind of culture do you want in your office? And then what are the steps for getting there? For us, early on I noticed that there was sometimes when conversations got difficult, people went to the artificial harmony. Like they didn't want to hurt each other's feelings, so we didn't have the tough conversations. So we began to structure activities where, for instance, after particular events, we always had a positive, improvable go-around, right, about that event. And if the feedback was not specific cognitive example, meaning that it was you did a great job, then we would probe further, say, what about it was great? Like, what made you feel great? What specific thing did they do? And so it was hard to do at first, but as you practice it, then it just becomes part of the culture. We just give each other feedback. Not good, not bad. It just is, right? Because we're all trying to get better. We're all on the same path that way. The other thing was making sure, think about how you structure your staff meetings. So think about your team and who they are, the introverts, the different styles, the communication styles, and make your meeting around those different styles, right? So do you have action-oriented, product happening, which a lot of us do. That's easy to do. But do you also have the mushy stuff? Do you have the check-ins? How are folks doing? What's happening? And then as a leader, how do you model the vulnerability in those opportunities, right? So for me, I was very uncomfortable at first sharing things about, when my mom had cancer and when she passed away. Then my staff hearing me talk about that and seeing me still do my work, but talk about the struggle that I was going through, opened up many interesting conversations that we had, individually or even as a group. Like we'd be in staff meetings and be like, dang, like 7 people cried in that staff meeting. And we'd be like, damn, that's awesome. Like we have it, not that we were trying to make each other cry, but that we would feel the comfortable, that the environment was safe enough and comfortable enough to be able to say, I just showed you some of my soul and I didn't feel judged by you, right? And so, and it's an ongoing process, right? Because as you get busier or more engaged with different things on campus, people then go to the action and the product. And so constantly reminding people that they're more than just their output and their product, that you care about them and you know that there will be struggles, And during those times of struggles, we will have your back. The team will have your back, leadership included.
Thank you so much. I'm seeing, one of the things I'm taking away is how intentional you all are about this, and I know you're so busy. So there's a vision and an intentionality about this. And I assume that sometimes it's not so easy to do. So next question is, in your role as a manager, what are the challenges that come up for you when trying to maximize your employees' contributions while simultaneously helping them meet their own goals? Can you share a couple of tips or tools that folks here might want to try out to help them find that sweet spot? So challenges and then things you've done to help you manage those challenges.
I think for me, I think one of the challenges that I think about, and I think that a lot of leaders don't necessarily ask themselves the question, is how do we maintain a growth mindset and flexibility as supervisors and managers? Because situations and people are fluid and they're going to change. And when you're dealing with people, you inevitably will have to deal with things that are not linear. So, for example, I work in an area where I have a range of types of work, diversity of people. And when you think about types of work, oftentimes, types of work will also create a culture and climate and personality, right? So I work with our maintenance and trade staff. I work with our custodial staff. I work with our residential education staff. So we have our folks who work in dining. So there's different types of cultures, environments. So one of the things for me that I think about is a challenge is reminding myself of context and the goals. And when I remind my staff of the mission, making sure that I'm communicating in a way that also respects the culture and environment in which my staff are showing up as. So for some of my folks are more operational. They don't necessarily like the mushy, touchy-feely stuff. So I will give that to them in small doses so they know about my values, but still respect their work and want to be efficient and kind of achieve their goals. While some of my other staff who have more knowledge and depth and understanding around some of the softer skills, appreciate that more. Just showing appreciation and generosity on a regular basis is probably one of the things that I do to overcome those challenges.
For me, when I am recruiting for my team members, I intentionally try and recruit people who are perhaps different from other members of my team. I prefer having diversity on the team, whether it's in race, gender, generation. And I intentionally do that because I think having that adds strength to our team. It brings different perspectives, it brings different outlooks, and I don't think I have all the answers, and I like to collaborate with my team so that, because a lot of times they bring great ideas. However, that also brings challenges because it is having different perspectives, and sometimes that can bring animosity between some members if they're in different, for example, different stages in their lives. I have somebody who's closer to retirement, isn't as motivated, whereas there's somebody else who's perhaps younger in their career and is extremely motivated, and they have to work together. And how do you find that balance? It is a continuing challenge, but one of the things I have tried to do is to help them empathize with the other person. We all have things going on in our lives, whether or not we share that, are willing to share that, and that's not at my discretion to share. It's only when somebody else is willing to share that with them. But just trying to get the other member to see the different perspective and try to be understanding about that. So that's one of the things I try to do.
One of the things is I like to have conversations about their vision, right? They're not their vision necessarily just in the context of the job that they're in and what they're doing, but their longer term vision, like where are they trying to go? Because that helps me map out what other places can I put them in potentially in the organization where they could learn the lateral skills and potentially even keep them longer, right? So if somebody is really is an accounts position, but they're very interested in project management, thinking, okay, what could I do to shift percentages of their job that would meet what they want to do, but also meet the organizational goals, and then being creative. And I think once staff see you doing that, they come with their ideas of how that could look. So much like I was trained about how to come to a manager or a leader and tell my idea, my staff know how to do that with me now too. So they're good at that. So they get what they want usually, within reason. The other thing, more tangibly, is we've been looking, and actually got this from one of my newer staff members. When he does performance evaluations, instead of thinking about it as a 1-year goal, he breaks it up into 3, 6, 9, and 12 months. And so there are checkpoints along the way. So you have the bigger goal, and then you have the sub goals. So in 3 months, what's reasonable to have reached and done? Because at that 3-month conversation, you can calibrate or recalibrate the expectation around that and do. Whereas I've seen in the past where we speak in the 11th month and it's too late. It's not reasonable that you'll achieve that goal. And then lastly, I'll say it's a constant calibration of your bar as a supervisor, their bar as an employee, and your organizational needs. And I think what I've learned is my expectations are really, really high. And one of my mentors once told me, don't let your sense of urgency crush people. And so I have to really be reasonable about whether my bar is achievable or not, and then kind of always calibrate that.
Thank you. And for our last question from me, you've already touched on this. What is the role of trust in developing an engaged team or workforce?
It's one of the most important things for us. I think your words and your deeds have to match as much as possible. And when you say you're going to do something, people don't forget. So I've learned, for instance, to be clear with my staff about when I'm brainstorming and thinking out loud, and when I'm actually at the point of a decision. So I'm a big brainstormer. I like to think out loud, and then people would walk away and think that I had just made a decision on that, and that was confusing. So I had to be able to take that feedback and say, okay, let me be more clear about that. So it's incredibly important that the trust is developed in there. I would also say, how do you I'll give you an example. So we talk a lot about being able to take feedback and X, Y, and Z in my organization. And one time, I have this thing about phones and meetings and all that, because I felt like people were on social media or texting or whatever. And so we had this kind of rule about that. And then one time I was, there was a situation going on, so I was checking my email, and my staff member called me out in front of everybody in a meeting. And I was like, my ego said, oh, dang, like she just called me out, and I felt some kind of way about it. But then 5 seconds later, I was like, damn, she just called me out. That's cool, right? The staff is owning the brand and holding each other accountable for practicing what we preach. So I put my phone away. I said, I'm sorry, you're right. And then we laughed about it later. It wasn't her intention to embarrass me, even though I felt a little embarrassed at the time, but it was with good intentions.
For me, building trust with my team, it comes from trying to be, as much as possible, authentic, and also being willing to be vulnerable with your team without trying to cross that line between being a boss and also being a friend. One of the examples I can think of is I was with one of my team members, and we were at a workshop, and they said, please share something personal with the person sitting next to you as a getting to know you thing. And I shared with her my struggles with coming out when I was a very young teenager, or young adult, I'm sorry, and how my parents had reacted to that. And she was very drawn into my story, and she was like, when it came her turn to share her story, she told me about her struggles with a health condition she had. And she said later on in sharing with the whole group, she only felt safe to be able to share that story with her because I had shared my story with her. And so for me, it's just being able to be authentic as much as possible, showing that you're also vulnerable. As I mentioned, I make them do some public speaking, even though I'm not comfortable with it. But it's also just being able to do that and then modeling that behavior for them as well.
For me, intellectual and psychological safety is really key to kind of creating creativity and doing the work. So that's important for me as a relational, someone who thinks a lot about relationships and someone who thinks about the idea of organizations and how you can feel safe contributing. The other piece is the reality that we work in human organizations where you have multiple layers. So you have actually no choice but to offer trust. So don't resist it. I work in a unit that has probably over 1,000 people when you count students and full-time staff. And so the reality is I am dependent every day on my team. And if I don't trust them, then that I am failing as a supervisor because you literally cannot do it alone, and you don't ever do it alone when you're on a team. So that's a big part of the way I think about it.
So we have time for a few questions. Who would like to start? Okay, we're gonna share this lovely double microphone.
Hi, good morning. I wanted to touch back on one thing that Shirley, what you mentioned about currently I have a situation where I have a similar situation with an older staff member and younger staff member at opposite ends of not necessarily motivation in terms of their goals of being productive and wanting to do their best work. But in the reality, the older staff member is just slower, just physically and mentally just slowing down. And so I have to, I'm picking up the slack, but, my other staff who are able to really keep up are witnessing that and constantly coming to me with, what are you going to do? How can you do? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Meanwhile, the other staff member who's been here longer than me, and I'm constantly working with her to try to motivate and improve, but there's been a long enough period now where I know it's just not going to happen. And so, what would you suggest?
You're like a courier. Thank you. That's an excellent question, and it is an almost exact scenario that I currently have. When I first started, the older person on my team, and I hope all this stays in this room, the older person in the team, okay, well, I won't use any names, but the older person on the team had been told or encouraged several times to retire, and by the management prior to me. My personal philosophy is that I would never encourage somebody to do that. I don't know their own personal history. I don't know their circumstances, and that's an individual choice for when somebody wants to retire. So I actually met with the individual and asked them point blank, what is it that you like about this job? And what keeps you here? And then what else is it that you're looking for? Because sometimes I think we can kind of get in a rut and just keep doing things the same way over and over again. So meeting with that person, giving them additional things that nobody had ever even asked them for their opinion. And this person had said to me, I was the first person to ever invite them to be on an interview panel, to have the people on that joined the team. And just by doing that, helped them feel empowered. I also met with the younger person, and that was a challenge as well, because that person was, just saying, well, they don't do anything. They're so slow. They don't know how to use a computer as fast as I do. And I tried to put it in, I asked them, can you think about what life will be like for you 20 years from now? And we work in the computer sciences department. 20 years ago, some of the things you use now didn't even exist or will not exist in 20 years. And that will be you in the future. And I think putting that, having that person envision what it would be like, helped her to empathize. So good luck to you. It's not easy.
Yes. Oh, that's a great idea. Are you comfortable yelling your question out? And okay. Okay, so how did you get through your first year of management with fear of failure? And how did you get through your first year at Berkeley? Just because it's a different culture? Is that? No. I'm with you. Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think this is our last question, and multiple ones of you can answer.
I'll try to take a stab at that. So a little bit about me. I'm originally from Oklahoma. So grew up in Oklahoma, worked on the East Coast for a while, Philly, New York. So the idea of being able to sort of have this flexibility when you come in is definitely, I can empathize with that. So I'd say one of the biggest things for me is psychological flexibility is one of the biggest things that I can't emphasize enough. So one of the most traumatic things that can happen to us, to the psyche, is change. But as soon as possible, you're able to be flexible and adjust to that, you will find that you will have empowered yourself to commit to that. And I'm speaking on behalf of someone who was new to Berkeley 4 years ago, has had 3 jobs and 4 supervisors in 4 years since I came to Berkeley. I was Associate Dean of Students, Associate Vice Chancellor now, and now I'm Director for Cal Dining. So I've had a lot of transitions and new transitions almost as a new manager almost every year and a half. So one, I stick to some of the formulaic things that I like to do as a manager, but also, again, having that psychological flexibility, knowing you have to adjust to new people, new situations, new operational things, and new skills, but reminding yourself that to have that confidence. And trust me, imposter syndrome is a real deal here. I had that moment. I don't know if y'all have had it, that moment where you're in tears. I had that moment 4 months when I came here. My supervisor saw it in me. The one thing I would say to you is if you could also find out who your people are, find those people as quickly as possible to have your community. Luckily, my people that I had was a small group when I first came here. There are other political things I can't get into about the challenges of finding your people, but when you find those people, those are the people that you can be vulnerable with. You can talk about what you are struggling with, and you can be okay if you happen to shed those tears in that moment, because that is so important to have those folks you can trust, but also ask for feedback in an environment that you, as a manager, know, because the dynamics are you're going to have a lot expected of you, a lot asked of you. Things not told to you because you are expected to know them as a supervisor or manager. So once you find those people, hold on to them, ask them for feedback, and make sure it's intended for the purposes of your success. And that's a big thing for me.
My wife always tells me, just fake it till you make it. I don't know if that really works. One of the good advice I was given when I first became a manager was to take these courses through the Keys. I don't remember what it stands for, but there are courses offered here on campus that are actually pretty great, and they focus on different topics such as dealing with difficult employees, how to deal with just different types of managerial courses that you can take. And I found that to be actually really empowering. And it also just was a great networking opportunity, because then you met other people who were also new to campus and also going through the same thing. So it was a great support network.
Yeah, ditto what David said. I think one of my mentors used to call it a 502. And so he would call me or text me and be like, hey, 502. And that was meet at 502 for drinks at the bar down the street. and we would talk about like kind of what was going on and share kind of our frustrations and get strategy together, et cetera. The other thing I would say is think about the parts of your job that are complicated and will get you fired, right? The legal stuff, the fun stuff, the different things, and then find content experts and cling on to them and always create great relations. I'm best friends with our HR person, our financial analyst. Like I don't feel bad or dumb when I ask them a question that people think I should know. They're the experts in that role for a reason. So use them and appreciate them and ask questions.
So I know we need to save just a minute to do the evaluations, but before we do, I want to do something. This is a very technical term called a blurt. So turn to your neighbor and just take 30 seconds. Tell them one thing that you heard that you're curious about, that you might want to learn more about. Again, find challenging, just a quick blurt, and then we'll come back again. So something that you might want to pursue, learn. Say hi to your neighbor. Make sure both people have had a chance to comment. All right, so thank your partner, and please help us thank our panelists, David, Shirley, and Fabrizio, very much for your inspiring stories and challenges and vision. And then I know we have some evaluations here to do before you leave. So thank you all for coming. We really appreciate you being here. I wish we had more time. It seems like it just flew by. It's a big topic, so we hope to have more opportunities to talk about this. Thank you so much for coming.